Hello, let's talk about past life regression. So I know that past life regression works. And the reason that I know it is because I've lived it. And I'm going to give you two examples right now of how it's helped me. So number one is I'm a mother of three amazing children. And when they were little, when my two oldest daughters were little, so from the first 5 years of me being a mother, I always dressed them alike. And everybody would say, oh, it's so cute that you have them match. But deep down, what was happening is I was terrified that I would lose one of my children. And so I dressed them the same so that I could say, this is what they were wearing. That's how great my fear of losing my child was. It didn't seem rational. There was no way to understand it. It's not like I'd ever lost them in a store or that they had been taken from me at any point in this life. And I just didn't understand, but I was terrified of losing my children. In 2018, I started doing healing work, and that fear started to relax, but it wasn't until I did past life regression and realized where that fear actually came from that I was able to let go of the fear. So that's one example. Another example is that since 2017, 2018, I know in my heart that I've wanted to talk about religion and spirituality, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it, even though I have so much wisdom and knowledge and am connected and am a channel. I still struggled to come out and share what I know. And I didn't understand, and I would do things like self-sabotage, or I would procrastinate and not get things done, or not post what I wanted to post or needed to post, or not get back to that person who wanted to work with me. And so I just didn't understand what was happening. It did not seem rational because I am a get things done type of person. And I was able to get things done in other areas of my life, but just not in the areas where I had to talk about religion and spirituality. Excuse me. So I did a past life healing on that and realized where that came from and was able to work through that so that I could show up. I now talk about it. I now talk about spirituality and all the time. You can go on my podcast. You can go on my Instagram. You can go on my website. But I didn't have that ability to do that. So I knew past life regression worked. Absolutely knew it. I knew it because I had experienced it. I was also and have also been trained in past life regression therapy. And so I know that it works for others, and I've helped others reclaim their soul's purpose, let go of irrational fears that don't make sense and that they think they're crazy or other people think that they're crazy, that they have that even though they're not crazy at all. Or it just seems irrational, like, why would I be scared of this? So I want you to know that I not only have experienced it, but have helped others in healing very irrational fears that just don't make sense. However, where I was in my process is, yes, I know this works, but I don't have the academic research behind it. I don't have the scientific research behind it. So many people say that reincarnation isn't real or that past lives isn't real. So I didn't feel comfortable coming out and talking about it. All of that has changed now as I'm getting my master's in women's spirituality, and my midterm for spirituality and trauma was to focus on a healing modality that brings in spirituality. For me, past life regression is extremely spiritual and not religious. I want to be very clear. It's not religious. It's spiritual. It's a very beautiful experience with yourself and your soul, with the divinity that is you, the power, the greater power, that whatever you call on. And so allowing these two to come together, I was able to find endless amounts of research on past life regression, on where reincarnation was taken out of Christianity. And so I want to share that with you today because now I feel so much more comfortable and confident talking about past life regression, and I want you to feel more comfortable with it as well. Okay? So here we go. So this is the presentation. I've added a few more things since I presented this for my women's spirituality midterm. And I also wrote a paper on it and am writing another paper on it. If you want more information, just reach out to me. My email is jessica@lovepersonalgrowth.com, so you can get more information. Here's a quick agenda. I'm not going to go all through all of this. You can read it. But I will say that one of the things that really changed my life in this, if you only have a few minutes to watch this, is the book Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian L. Weiss. It's on Audible, and it's less than 2 hours, I believe. It will change your life and your perspective, and I'm going to talk more about that in the coming slides. Okay? So, I'm not going to read these definitions. You could pause the screen and you can read it, but it's really about taking the patient or the client back into time to the original source of the pain or the trauma or the experience that they had, and healing it from that point of view so that they can move forward in their lives. What I found is that past life experiences that impact this current life, they need to be honored and addressed so that you can move forward, okay? And it'll keep coming up in different ways, and I'll talk about that later. Here's another example. Now, I will say that the past example, or the past definition, talked about hypnotherapy as the modality. I don't use hypnotherapy in my sessions. I only use meditation. And so just so you know that it's not just hypnotherapy that can get someone into a past life. Also, it's happening more and more frequently as well, just in general. Okay, so reincarnation is something that is believed by many religions around the world, and here are a few of them. Also, Druidism believes in reincarnation, and New Age teachings also embrace the reincarnation concept. However, what I found in my research, and you don't have to look very far if you know somebody that is Christian or Muslim or Jewish, is that, or Islam, is that reincarnation does not is inconsistent with the worldviews of the monolithic religions. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, specifically to Christianity. I'm not going to get into Judaism or Islam. That could be at another time, but just Christianity right now. So, much of Christian beliefs, or Western beliefs, I should say, has been said, oh, well, there aren't beliefs in reincarnation, but that's not true. Plato actually did talk about reincarnation, and again, you could pause this, I won't read through this, but that our souls do come back, and they return to the stars in which they came, and then they come back again. And so there is Western belief from Plato that reincarnation exists. Also, Lee Irwin, who is a professor, he talks a lot about reincarnation in many of his papers. And what I found to be really interesting is that in approximately 400 CE, which is Common Era in the academic world, BC before Christ and AD after death does not exist. That's not terminology that's used. It's BCE before the Common Era and CE Common Era. So approximately 400 CE in the Common Era, there are teachings that are shifting, that are moving, and there's this debate between two forms of the church. And one form of the church does not believe in reincarnation. And so that form of the church wins out with Constantine. And so what happens is, and I'll read it here, thus the Christian doctrine of one life, one death, one judgment became a theological dogma that emphasized the political control of the church over all Christian body, soul, and human destinies. So following the council, those holding beliefs in metempsychosis or transmigration were labeled as heretic, right? So we're not going to believe that. That is false, and that is not what Christianity believes, which forced those who led such beliefs underground and into more esoteric streams of belief less aligned with institutional Christianity. Gnosticism, as an example, is one of those forms. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of the history that actually occurred, because really what won out is the political winner, and that's the story that was told to the masses. But that's not the actual story, okay? So I just want to make sure that that is clear. Really, one has to say, well, how can I, let's just say it's the church, how does the church control someone in fear, through fear, if they believe that they have more than one life? If they believe that they get to come back and do it again, right? So you can sit with that for a little bit, and feel free to reach out and ask me questions on this. I'd love to discuss it more. Okay, so here we go. As I started to study past life regression, I found that there was a lot of research and a lot of data on it. Now, here's what I'll say. A lot of these seem older, but that's because why are we going to continue to study it and prove it when we already know that it exists and that it works? And one thing that I did tell my professor is I said, I don't know that I'm going to do past life regression for my midterm because I don't know if I'm going to find enough data. Turns out I found plenty of data. And so it's also called parapsychology, which is a study of ESP. It's the study of telepathy. There's around 14 universities in the country, like the University of Duke, the University of Virginia, that study parapsychology. There's also many others. And so it's studied through various different means. Okay? Now, let's argue against it. Why not? Why not do past life regression? So when I study something, I want to understand why it doesn't work or why it shouldn't work or why people don't believe in it. Not so that I could argue my point so much, but just so that I could have a really well-rounded mind about the topic. Okay, so number one is that the reason is that it's not evidence-based. Now, here's what I'll say to that. 40 years ago, 60 years ago, women were literally electrocuted, like electroshock, because of the trauma that they experienced. And they thought that by inducing this electroshock, it would work and that they wouldn't have these mental health concerns anymore. Okay. That obviously did not work, right? And we learned from that, and we learned better ways. And we now know the understandings of what happens when we do not just past life regression, but what happens when we do somatic work, right? 40 years ago, there was no evidence on somatic work. None whatsoever. There was no evidence on cognitive-based theory work. There was no evidence on internal family systems work. But guess what? There is now. And so we're in this phase in which we know that there is evidence-based work on these modern mental health psychology and psychotherapies. It's just there is evidence that past life regression works. So now that there's evidence that past life regression works, I would argue that there's evidence that it works. Maybe there's not so much of evidence that reincarnation exists, although, there's so much to that. Even Jesus said, that he references in the Bible, who do you think I am? And then they tell him the people who came before him. And then he talks about him coming back as the Messiah. Anyways, regardless, I digress there. Excuse me. Okay, the second argument that was made in this paper that I read is it an ethical therapy? And the reason why is they asked this question is because you could ask leading questions. So for example here, a leading question could be, go back to your life as a soldier in the American Revolution. So then you may go back into that time. However, that is not how I work. That is not how an ethical past life regressionist works, right? We allow you to go back in time that you feel aligned with, where your soul is taking you. And so we don't lead with those questions, and I don't lead with those questions. Okay? So now, that same paper that argued against the evidence-based and the ethical also said that you get positive results from past life regression. So whether you believe in reincarnation or not, whether you even believe in past life regression or not, you could still get positive results from a past life regression therapy session. And, right, it's undoubtedly what they write here, undoubtedly true that past life regressions are performed with the intention of helping patients, and indeed, many patients do find some relief undergoing these therapies. We're going to talk about what that means in a little bit. Okay, so here is another quote from a different paper that I researched. Past life experiences have often become inextricably connected to the concept of reincarnation. Yet recent research reflects that belief in reincarnation is not necessary prerequisite for its occurrence. You do not have to believe in reincarnation for past life therapy to help you, for past life regression to help you. Okay? So, these are prominent psychotherapists and psychiatrists in the field that have studied past life regression and perform it on thousands of people, okay? Brian Weiss changed my life. Many Lives, Many Masters. I told you, get that book on Audible. He is a graduate from Columbia University and Yale Medical School. And so Brian was doing work with patients, but it took years for them to get through the challenges, if they ever did get through some of their fears or their phobias or their eating disorders or whatever they were struggling, or their relationship challenges. It took them years. And so he was working with this woman named Catherine, and this woman named Catherine was working on some very difficult and challenging issues that she was facing, and you could read all about it in the book. However, he got to a point where he thought it was quote unquote solved, that he's done everything that he knows how to do as a psychotherapist to help her. And she was still struggling. So he said to her, take me back to when the symptoms began. And just like that, she regressed into where it actually began. And they started doing past life healing work. He was in shock and awe about the work that they did and about the impacts that it had and about the healing that took place. And he actually struggled to share his findings because he thought he would be laughed out of the psychotherapist community. But he said, I cannot keep this secret. I cannot hold this in because of my fear of how I will be perceived. I have to get this out into the world. And anybody else who does this therapy and finds it life-changing or transformative, you also need to share it. So I'm also doing what Dr. Weiss has asked, and sharing what I've learned. Okay, so Ian Stevenson, this is one of the most evidence-based documented researches that exists in past life therapy and in reincarnation. So they have over 2,500 cases on past life experiences, and he interviewed many of the children, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the coming slides on what the results were. But I just want you to know that there is a lot of research out there. And if you're curious about it, go to Google Scholar. Don't look on Google. Go to Google Scholar and start researching, or reach out to me and I can help you. Okay, so features of past life regression. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these. They are very visual. You could see what's happening, whether that's through your own eyes or through you watching it as like a third person, like it's a movie. You experiencing it or you watching it from above. The imagery is so familiar. You know that you were there. You know that you experienced this. Also, there are, I already talked about this first and third person, and there are many improvements in mental state and emotional state and physical state when past life regression occurs. And it does become easier and easier with repetition. So if you come in once and you're like, it took me a little bit to get into it, as you do it more and more, it'll just become more intuitive to you. You'll tap into the life that you need to gain access from, to whether that's to gain your intuitive gifts, to remember something that you wanted to remind yourself of, to step into your power, or to heal past trauma that's currently impacting your current life. Okay? So let's go to the next slide. All right, so there's various methods. A typical form is hypnosis, but as I said, I do not do hypnosis. I do meditation. And also, it's now known to be more spontaneous recalling of past life memories. Okay, what can it heal? So let's talk about this because this is really important. This actually should have been probably my first slide. So what can past life regression heal? Mental diseases, anxiety disorders, phobias, fears, grief. I will tell you that my fear of death no longer exists. I don't have a fear of death. I don't even have a fear of how I'm going to die. Once I moved into this spiritual phase, my fear of death subsided. But I still had how am I going to die type of fear of death? I don't have either of those. It can help you with sexual abuse, with obesity, with physical pain and illnesses. It really does help with relationships. However, I would say that my bread and butter, where I truly focus, is we go into the lives that you honed your spiritual and intuitive gifts. You knew them, you embodied them, you expressed them. And now you want to bring those back into this life and you need help gaining access to them. That's where I come in. Okay? So it will lead to emotional and spiritual healing and transformation. It will. Okay? So in conclusion, be open to what's possible. Here's some references here, and I will leave you with that. Is there anything else that I wanted to share with you? So that's it. So if you have questions, reach out to me. Send me an email, jessica@lovepersonalgrowth.com, or shoot me a DM at lovepersonalgrowth on Instagram. And I would be happy to answer questions for you. Or maybe not answer questions, maybe just talk things out, talk things through. Maybe this is opening your mind to things that you never even thought possible. Maybe you're remembering something right now that you're like, wow, I've really struggled with that fear and I never knew why. So just be open to different ways of healing, and I would love to support you. Talk with you soon.